I would say that we have gone through some rather difficult passages in the past week. By comparison, today seems lighter, but it also speaks mightily to our condition here on earth. The danger of politics, the splitting that can bring. Where we left off last week was Absalom, David's son, had murdered Ammon, his brother, in revenge for what he had done to his sister. And so Absalom, the king's son, has fled out of the nation as a fugitive and as a murderer. We'll be reading from 2 Samuel 15. What happens in the chapter before is that Joab, one of David's generals, one of his right-hand men, convinces a very wise woman to convince David to let Absalom back. So Absalom's exile has been lifted, and Absalom can return, no longer a fugitive. But all that has happened, from David's sin with Bathsheba to the breaking of his household in violence, I think a lot of favor and respect has been taken away from King David. And instead, as Absalom returns, Absalom, David's son, has a lot going for him here in the eyes of the people of Israel. It is said in the end of chapter 14, now in all Israel there was no one so much to be praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. Absalom's a good-looking guy, and here he comes returning with great promises and great hope of being a better king than David ever was. Let us hear in chapter 15 then of how exactly he does that. Chapter 15 of 2 Samuel says, "After this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom used to rise up early and stand beside the way of the gate. When any man had a dispute to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, 'From what city are you?' And when he said, 'Your servant is of such and such a tribe in Israel,' Absalom would say to him, 'See, your claims are good and right, but there's no man designated by the king to hear you.' Absalom would say, 'Oh, that I were judge in the land. Then every man with a dispute or cause might come to me, and I would give him justice.' Whenever a man came near to pay homage to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Thus Absalom did to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, 'Please let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed to the Lord in Hebron. For your servant vowed a vow while I lived at Geshur in Aram, saying, if the Lord will indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will offer worship to the Lord.' The king said to him, 'Go in peace.' So he arose, went to Hebron. But Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, 'As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, Absalom is king at Hebron.' With Absalom went 200 men from Jerusalem, who were invited guests, and they went in their innocence and knew nothing. And while Absalom was offering the sacrifices, sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor from the city of Gilo. And the conspiracy grew strong, and the people of Absalom kept increasing. And a messenger came to David, saying, 'The hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom.' David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, 'Arise, let us flee, or else there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Go quickly, lest he overtake us and bring down ruin on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword.' The king's servants said to the king, 'Behold, your servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king decides.' So the king went out, and all his household went after him. The king left 10 concubines to keep the house. The king went out, and all the people after him. They halted at the last house, and all his servants passed by him, and all the Kerethites, and all the Perathites, and all the 600 Gittites who had followed him from Gath, passed on before the king. Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, 'Why do you also go with us? Go back, stay with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your home. You came only yesterday, and shall I today make you wander about with us, since I go I know not where? Go back, take your brothers with you, and may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you. But Ittai answered the king, As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king shall be, whether for death or for life, there also will your servant be. And David said to Ittai, Go then, pass on. So Ittai the Gittite passed on with all his men and all the little ones who were with him. And all the land wept aloud as the people passed by, and the king crossed the brook at the Kidron, and all the people passed on towards the wilderness. And Abiathar came up, and behold, Zadok came also with the Levites, bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they sent down the ark of God until all the people had passed out of the city. The king said to Zadok, Carry the ark back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back, and let me see both it and his dwelling place. But if he says, I have no pleasure in you, behold, here I am. Let him do to me what seems good to him. The king also said to Zadok the priest, Are you not a seer? Go back to the city in peace with your 2 sons, Ahimaaz your son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. See, I will wait at the fords of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. So Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. But David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, barefoot and with his head covered. And all the people who were with him covered their heads, and they went up, weeping as they went. And it was told David, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. When David was coming to the summit where God was worshipped, behold, Hushai, the Archite, came to meet him with his coat torn and dirt on his head. David said to him, If you go on with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I have been your father's servant in time past, so now I will be your servant. And then you will defeat for me the counsel of Ahithophel. Are not Zadok and Abiathar the priests with you there? So whatever you hear from the king's house, tell it to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Behold, their 2 sons are with them there, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son. And by them you shall send to me everything you hear. So Hushai, David's friend, came into the city, just as Absalom was entering Jerusalem. It's the word of the Lord. This year, in fact, in the next 6 months, you're going to be promised a lot of things. From whatever you see online, from flyers in your mailbox to unsolicited texts to your phone. Someone you don't even know is going to tell you, I have your best interests in my heart. It's the perennial promise of politicians, and here we are in 2024, not just a simple election year, but a presidential election year as well. You will be promised a lot of things. You're going to be told exactly what you want to hear. Actually, exactly what polls have told people that they think you want to hear. Well, it's going to follow a very familiar script that you've heard before. Who's been put in Washington before, will they fulfill the promises they've made? No, and you know why? You know why they can't fulfill their promises? You know why they don't have your best interest in their hearts? Well, because they're not on my side. Those people in Congress aren't like me. If only I were judging the land, if only they could have more people like me, then things would be better for you. Look, I understand this feels so silly, reductionistic, and maybe guilty here of playing both sides, saying, yes, both Republicans and Democrats fall into this lying way of just telling you what you want to hear, but it's true, and it continues on. And it's not something just core to Democrats and Republicans, but Absalonians and Davidians as well, I think. That this way of just trying to capture and steal your heart goes back thousands of years. This is how we get people to support, how people get support. they flash promises. And they often might do so with a display of strength, a display of wealth and importance to get you to think, hey, they are worth following. They'll nod sympathetically as you share what you are struggling with, and then say exactly what you want to hear, all to get the effect of when you go in that little box, you check their name. To steal your vote, they first got to steal your heart, right? It's the power of persuasion. Campaign politics of 2024 America is not that uncommon from ancient Israel. Now, I should say yes, there is good intention out there, and there's goodness that we have democracy. I don't want to speak broadly negative about all of that, but still, we cannot ignore the fact of the human temptation to just say what needs to be said to get power for yourself. It's a powerful temptation. And it's one with, let's be honest, very little accountability, right? Absalom is out there campaigning for votes for the hearts of the Israelites. Even though they're not a democracy, he doesn't need votes. He just needs hearts to get support for this coup d'etat he puts into place. He's just trying to get into people's minds that I would be a better king than my father David. We fall for this tactic all the time, don't we? Yes, there are better rulers than David out there, right? But when our hearts are truly stolen, when we looked even a pretty good candidate, right? There are good candidates out there. But if our hearts are so stolen that we put all of our hope in them to actually bring the change we need, we're so greatly disappointed. Why? Well, because when our hearts are stolen, they're stolen away from worshiping the true King of Kings, Jesus Christ. That even the greatest candidate in the last 20 years you can think of that you wish like you could just vote for another term, even them, they will disappoint you. Because we're not called to have our whole hearts enraptured to any politician or any ruler. To do so is idolatry. Yet we fall for it every time. Why I'm thankful for this passage today, why we can be thankful for this passage, is this shows to us what empty political promises the princes of the world bring. That princes like Prince Absalom brings empty political promises. They're not worth having our hearts stolen by. Instead, we should turn our hearts to God's promises of his provision, of his providence. God's providential promises show us something different. And so our third point will be a way of application, right? How do we walk? How do we live faithfully by his providence? Why do we know that Absalom's promises here are empty and political? At the very beginning, it says he gets himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run beside him. Sounds like, well, he needs a good campaign car, right? With his name slapped on it, Absalom, 934 or whatever. This is all about status. It actually has nothing to do with him needing to get around. Why? Jerusalem's really actually, as a city in that time, was not conducive to chariots. Chariots are great for like a big open plain. Jerusalem's got walls and hills. It doesn't work well for chariots. And also, yes, chariot means you get along a little bit faster, but you got 50 strong dudes like running ahead of you, you actually can't move that fast. So what's the point here? You get 50 guys running on ahead of you, it makes everyone turn their heads and like, what is coming down the road? And then you see someone in this seat carried by horses, gorgeous head of hair, like a real good-looking guy. You think, that's a king. I'd follow that guy into battle. This old David guy with a really messed up family, that's the only good part of that family. I'd follow him. It's about visibility. It's funny how, we do operate like this. I was looking out the window in my office last month, and I saw a police motorcycle, like 5 police motorcycles. I'm like, that's a lot of police motorcycles, huh? And then a black car with lights on it, like a black Suburban, and another one, and another one. I'm like, I think I know where this is going. And then one in the center, black Suburban, with on the front an American flag and another symbol I didn't quite recognize until I just Googled what the seal of the Vice President of the United States looks like. And so, yes, I saw Vice President Kamala Harris just coming down the road right there. How did I know? How did I see her? Actually, I didn't see her at all. I don't know if she was in there or not. The bulletproof windshields are probably tinted very well. You see the runners in front. You see the kind of car. You see how it's decorated. It communicates power. It communicates strength and importance of everyone clear out of the way. A very important person is here. That is exactly what Absalom is doing. He's not elected yet, right? But he's dressing like one already. To the point where you turn your head and be like, is that a vice president? No, it's Absalom. But he should be. He fits the part. He is play acting in some ways, assuming the kingly stature. But that's not the only way he assumes kingly stature, right? He goes to the gates. Now, if you had a problem, you had a dispute with your brother, you'd go to the king and say, like, hey, king, figure this out. That's kind of how the judicial system worked then. The wise king would decide for you. And so right outside the gate where people would go and be gathering to see the king, Absalom's just hanging out there, shaking hands, kissing babies, kissing people as well. He would rise early, stand beside the way of the gate. When any man had a dispute, come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, from what city are you? And he said, servant is of such a tribe in Israel. Absalom would say to him, see, your claims are good and right, but there's no man designated by the king to hear you. Oh, come on, Absalom. Hey, do you see how transparent this is, right? He is just saying what they want to hear. Oh, you're a man of Levi? Levites, right? Always so honest and judicial. I bet your mother makes a wonderful brisket, by the way. I know she does. All right, say hi to her for me. I'm sure you're in the right here, man. I'm sure you're absolutely right, but I don't know if my old man is with it anymore. I don't know if he's going to fall for your side. And then he would say, only if I were judge in the land. Then every man with a dispute or cause might come to me, and I would give him justice. He wins them over with that schmarmy little smile and says, if you could picture it, I'm judge, we'd be all right, wouldn't we? He's planning in their minds from the chariot to the shaking hands at the gate, how great it would be for him to be king. And he kisses them, which seems weird, right? Like, space, man. That's something a king does to communicate their blessing. The king comes to you and kisses you. In that time, it means you have my blessing. You're in my good favor. And so he grabs him. It's almost kind of forceful, like, oh, what are you doing, Absalom? Because he is forcing this vision of himself as king upon them. It's almost like presidential pardon before he's the president to give that pardon. Forcing into people's minds the picture of Absalom as king. All part of getting them to see it. And this reaches this crescendo with him declaring his kingship at Hebron. He says to his daddy that he needs to make a vow to the Lord at Hebron. And David's like, fine. I mean, how could any father say, no, I don't want you to go to church and worship God, right? It isn't a mere act of piety, though. He's sending out secret messengers to know what the signal is to shout out the kingship. He's accompanied by 200 men who don't know what's going on. But once these 200 men with Absalom arrive at Hebron and everyone's yelling, this is the new king, these 200 men have no choice to be like, I guess I have to follow this guy now. He's getting 200 men for him right then. And let's not also forget what he's doing by going to Hebron. Yes, Hebron is the place Absalom was born. Oh, that's appropriate, right? Going back to your roots. Hebron, a place of great cultural and historical significance for Israel. Great. Hebron is the place where David was anointed king. Okay, now you're starting to see the political showmanship here, right? He's getting people to see this is what a king looks like. He's anointed at Hebron. He's good looking. And so, as the word says, he steals the hearts of the people with this show of what a king should be. Not with action. He actually hasn't done anything. What has he done but ride around in a chariot, go to Hebron, and get people to blow trumpets? That's all he's done. But he gets people to see in their hearts how great it would be to have Absalom. A cultic, populist hero is what we have here. Who in the eyes of these people, once their heart is stolen, he can do no wrong. If Absalom does any error, because their hearts are so stolen and enraptured by the cult of Absalom, they'll make excuses for him. Absalom is in, David is out. all without any proving of the case. And so it has such an effect that David sees the writing on the wall, as it were. He cannot stay in Jerusalem. Absalom is coming. And he is coming with those 200 men. Absalom's not going to fight and cause bloodshed. The hearts of the people are already with Absalom. They'll fight against David. But he doesn't stay. David doesn't stay and set up a war council and fortify the positions of the walls. He just leaves town. Why? Why does he leave? It does seem like David really believes this is the end, that he might never return. The way he speaks, if I should ever see the ark again and his dwelling place, I don't know. He doesn't know if he's coming back. That's why he's weeping, clothes torn, barefoot. As we've looked at David's sin and the prophecy that the sword shall never leave his house, he might be saying, this is the fulfillment of that punishment of my sin with killing Uriah. This is the end of my reign. This is what I deserve. And yet, he still keeps the door open for some hope that the Lord might bring him back. Remember again the importance of 2 Samuel 7, the covenant promise to David's line, that it will be an everlasting dynasty. Again, how? How can this promise to David hold true when there's already civil war? Forget the dynasty of King David. Israel itself as a nation is about to crumble into civil war. How can God's promises be worth putting your faith in? Are God's promises just as empty as politician Absalom? No. David retreats from Jerusalem because he knows God might bring me back. God is more faithful than even David is to his own promises. He is certain of that goodness. And it's on this road that even though David is not seizing, his belief in the goodness of God, he is actually being revealed something that God has placed around him. He's placed around David some faithful, wonderful people. Starting with Ittai of Gath. As he leaves in verse 18 and 19, this man from Gath, a warrior, Gath is formerly part of the Philistines. It's where Goliath was from, Gath. And yet, David has this band of 600 mercenaries who have allied themselves to him, and he's saying, all right, guys, this is not your home. Don't follow me where I don't know where I'm going. Don't fight for me and die for me. I'm not your home king. Go home with your brothers. My road is lonely and isolating. Go home, Ittai. Stay home. David is not looking to gain an army. Again, he's not setting up a war council and building men. He's not trying to win things the way Absalom is. Absalom is doing things through cunning and political savvy, and David could hear, look, God's bringing him an army, right? And David's like, no, go home. And he blesses him with the chesed, the loving kindness of God, the faithfulness. He loves Ittai well. You can see the favor he has with Ittai. What a great man he is. But then Ittai shows his goodness by saying, as the Lord lives, Yahweh lives, and as my Lord the King lives, wherever my Lord the King shall be, whether for life or for death, there I will be your servant. He's making this vow in the name of Yahweh, that I'll die with you. A Ruth-like vow, right? Also a vow from a non-Israelite who's understanding what it's like to commit yourself to God's providence. There's something that Ittai shows us, even that David is struggling to believe. And yet, the irony here, David's not here looking for an army, but you know what God brings to him? An army. Not only that, David meets Zadok the high priest. And what does Zadok bring with him? But the Ark of the Covenant of God. An item that in the past of Israel, how did they view the Ark of the Covenant? Like the super weapon, like this talisman or lucky charm you could bring with you into battle and you'd be unconquerable because you've got the Ark with you. You see what David's getting? He has a chance to be like, all right, here's my army. Here's the Ark. I have got the approval of the joint chiefs of the army and all of the religion and God behind me. And that's a coalition, right? That's a coalition that'll get you elected. But he's not looking for that. He tries to send Ittai home. Ittai stays with him. Zadok comes with the ark. And what does he say? Take it back. Carry it back to the city. Why? Because if I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring back and let me see both it and his dwelling place. But if he says, I have no pleasure in you, here I am. He will do what seems good to him. He can see cynically what the ark is. He can see it as a way to grab power, but he doesn't. He can say it even as like a mark of comfort. He can use this for something cozy and encouraging, but he doesn't. He simply says, if God has favor upon me, in God's providence, in his good time, he might bring me back. But if this is all punishment for my sin, here I am, God. You know where to find me. It sounds a lot like despair, but he's not given up hope. That's what's curious about this. He is really heartbroken. I'm not going to paint this with like, oh, he's still got hope. He's happy. He's heartbroken. Yet he's not giving up that glimmer of hope. David is not sure what God's going to do. But he has faith that there might still be good in store for him. He's not going to use God as this political poker chip. He's not going to use God or the army as his ways to gain power. He's waiting to see what God will do first. The temptation there, I cannot imagine how great that must be. But God is not to be used like a name drop on the back cover of your book or another name on a recommendation letter that just says, yeah, David's a great guy, signed God. Like, he's not going to do that with the Ark of the Covenant. He knows the Ark belongs with the people. How selfish would it be to take the Ark away from the place of worship? It's the Ark of the Covenant. God's people need the Ark. It's not for David to use for his political gain. It's bigger than David. Whether he lives or dies, it'll be part of God's will. But then he gets even worse news here. It gets worse. It was told to David that Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, "Oh Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness." Kind of a strange thing that I found kind of in my reading, like they say Ahithophel from Gilonite of Gilon. Those details connected with our introduction to Bathsheba and elsewhere in 1 Kings. Ahithophel, a lot of people are pretty sure, is Bathsheba's grandfather. Ahithophel was in David's corner for a while, but you can understand that he'll take Absalom's side, that he's done with David by this point. Ahithophel is a great guy to have in your corner, like very wise, invaluable wise advisor. But just as if you know people who are like so defensive for you, they're like, yeah, this person is great to have in your corner, but terrifying when they're against you. That's what kind of political advisor Absalom just gained. And so he prays, God, frustrate those plans. He's not asking to smite Ahithophel. He has love for him, but like, would the plans come to nothing? Would those plans be ruined? Turn the wise counsel into foolishness. That's his prayer to God. Will God answer him? What will God say? What's God's providence to David here? Hushai shows up as he gets to the top of the Mount of Olives. And David says, you're no use to me here. Instead, he says, go back to the city, tell Absalom, I'll be your servant. Then you'll defeat for me the counsel of Ahithophel. He's seen for the first time, okay, maybe God, this is what you're doing. Send Hushai back. And just as he gets back and walks into the court and says, hey, Ahithophel, what's going on? The trumpets blast, the gates come up, and Absalom, the conspiratorial king, rides in. All according to plan, right? All according to David's master. This is not a mastermind plan. David is figuring out as he goes along. But why do things seem to be turning up for David? What does he get out of all of this? He keeps sending people back. He's not keeping people around him to marshal this support. But what does David get? He gets an army and he gets spies. Like, he gets a network of intelligence operatives, and he gets an army of strong men from Gath with him. Did he seek this out? No. He simply prayed, God, what will you do? And God, in his providence, his faithfulness to his promise to David for this everlasting kingdom, is showing up. All David does here is faithfully trust in God's providence. Is that what's so different between David and Absalom? I think It is, I will say, maybe you feel this tension too. It's difficult after all that David has done and failed to do in the last few chapters. Like, this is not holding David up like, see, here's the good guy. But something David has seen and something we still need to see is what it means to faithfully live trusting in God's providence. I think by all of David's failures, he's tired of trying to work things out for himself. And maybe that's a lesson he is slowly learning. That he can't afford to politically maneuver things for his own selfish gain, as he did with Bathsheba and Uriah. He can't afford to sit by and do nothing, as he did with Ammon and Absalom. He's realizing I either need to trust God or do nothing, or trust God, and my other option would be to sin. All I can do is to trust God to do his work. He even continually calls Absalom the king, which is interesting. Absalom, the king, is king because he has seized power by whatever means, selfish gain, just as he saw his father do with Bathsheba and with Uriah. He's learned well from his father. Does it seem like David is using Hushai here for his own political movements and power? Again, I think it's interesting. The one time he actually sets up a plan with Hushai is after he's prayed to God, God, will you show me a way to frustrate these plans? Because David has actually seen a great danger with Ahithophel being in Absalom's court, that it means great terror for Israel. And so he patiently, after praying, waits to see what God's will is and shows a great asset for him. David is not doing things in a flashy way. He's sending one guy back. He's not doing the public chariot with 50 runners way. It's just faithfully relying on God. Here I am. Do what seems good to you. Bring me back. Show me a way to come back. Oh, Hushai, that might be something you're doing, God. Let him do what seems good. David's faith throughout all of his sin. Because I can understand, seeing all that David has done and failed to do, I think we should also kind of be terrified of, well, what hope is there for me, a sinner, too? God's grace, even for David, a great, great sinner, is great enough to show him, point him back to the righteousness of God. David's still not living righteously. At the end of his life, he'll still do a great sin as well in how he handles the census and amassing forces. He still doesn't get perfect here. But God is continuing to reshape him to see what true righteousness looks like, what true providence looks like. God doing what seems good to him and not seeking our own power and our political maneuvers like Absalom would. This is hard for us, isn't it? To really try to live faithfully in light of God's promises. To say, God, your will be done, not my own. And it's especially hard because I don't think a lot of you here are Absaloms necessarily, but it's particularly difficult because there are a lot of Absaloms in the world who want to steal your heart, who want to capture your heart and your love. It can simply be just any one person who appears to listen well, promises big, tells you exactly what you want to hear, but they have no follow-through on what they say. It could be a political leader. It could be an influencer you read online. It could be a person you know whose beauty and talent have so captured your heart, you do anything to follow them. It could be a pastor, a religious leader. Even if it means betraying the person God put over you and rejecting the leaders put before you by God, and following after this person, God, that following after this person that has so captured your heart, that it doesn't matter what God's word says or how. They seem attractive, they seem wise, they seem powerful, they seem rich. I'll follow them. Yeah, much of Israel is acting like kind of a rebellious child in their teenage years. Do you kind of see this? Like, tired of the hypocrisy of their old man dad, and as soon as a good-looking hero with long, luxurious hair shows up and listens to them, they run out of the house with this new boyfriend. I know we're past Valentine's, but if you wanted to write a bunch of biblical-themed Valentine cards, you could write, "Is your name Absalom? Because you've captured my heart." That's exactly how we can act, right? That long-haired, winsome Absalom steals your heart. I'll get my happiness and fulfillment from the flashiest, richest person with the best status, or who can connect me to it. the way I can get power. It doesn't matter if the way we can get political power as Christians in the world comes through lying and deceit. Well, it gets me what I want, right? No. Not by lying, not by deceit, not by bad faith, not by people pretending to be religious. It's not how we gain victory. God will do what seems right to him. Even if it means us going into exile, even if it means us as Christians losing power. That's important. The way of victory is not just gaining more and more power in the political sphere, but faithfulness in God's providence. That's what matters most. God's providence may and often does lead through exile. Literally hear from David. It may lead to being alone. Like he is weeping as he goes. Everyone with him are weeping. He's humiliated. I mean, you're a king, and you have to flee to your own palace barefoot, going up to the Mount of Olives to oversee this beautiful kingdom that you've built, the house that you put together, right? The city that you captured through the waterways, and you're great. It's the city of David, right? Jerusalem. And he's standing over it on the Mount of Olives, weeping over Jerusalem, saying, God, what are you doing? That might be where we are called to go at times. And ask God, why would you have me go through this exile? Why would you pull me away from the comfort that I have before me? Because you might be in that feeling of exile right now, not on the verge of it. You might be in it. Saying, God, why would I have to suffer this humiliation and this frustration? The reason why we can be okay with that, not to say it doesn't hurt, and the tears still don't come, the reason why we can trust that God will do what seems good to him is because he himself went through that. That God's own son, Jesus Christ, went through the same thing of that humiliation. He gave up his seat in heaven to slum it around with us on the earth in a broken and a painful world. He endured isolation. People whose hearts were stolen elsewhere for him again and again. He endured pain and torment. He went up to the Mount of Olives as well, weeping over Jerusalem and said, look how much you've abandoned me. My people, your heart's been stolen away into selfishness and sin, going after other leaders. Jesus wept over Jerusalem as well and was humiliated on the cross. The greatest humiliation there is. Where is he now? He is exalted over the heavens and the earth, the right hand of God the Father. That, brothers and sisters, is what God's providence looks like. Even through humiliation and exile. On the other side is exaltation. Jesus went through all that so that you as well may be exalted. That's what's in store for you. That's what God's providence and his promises mean. That's not empty. That's not just saying what you want to hear. Being told humiliation may come your way is not what any of us want to hear. And it's not what any of us want to feel. But the promise that you will be brought through it. That's something even greater. That's not an empty promise. I mean, perhaps the most famous of all empty political promises is connected, though he maybe didn't say it, but connected to Herbert Hoover. You know, everyone's favorite president? The vacuum guy? It's not the vacuum guy. It's just Home Alone 2. Herbert Hoover. You probably don't know him unless you're kind of a U.S. history buff or a fan of Annie the Musical, which has a whole song blaming him for what I'll refer to soon. But he campaigned, or his people campaigned on this slogan, a chicken in every pot, which means like every home in America, every pot in America will have a chicken in it. Defeathered and ready to be cooked, that is, not just a live chicken, right? But that picture, every pot will have a chicken and every stomach will be filled. There'll be a car in every backyard. This is 1920s after all. Car in every backyard, that's like several Teslas in everyone's backyard today, right? It's prosperity. It was the 20s. It was the roaring 20s, a good time. And what is Herbert Hoover associated with? The Great Depression. And boy, oh boy, when it came for the Democratic campaign for FDR after him, did they beat that drum of chicken in every pot, huh? What empty political promises we get. Jesus does not promise you a chicken in every pot or car in your backyard. Because what good does that do? Honestly, what good does that do your soul? It gets you through today and maybe part of tomorrow. But when you're in exile and have to flee that home, what good is that chicken sitting in your empty home? Your battle with sin and temptation, what good is it to have a little bit more money? Doesn't. When you feel, even as you are trying to wrestle with sin and temptation, the counsel of Satan in your ear is constantly sending you into a tailspin. Know that Christ defeats, frustrates, destroys the counsel of Satan for you. He preserves you, Jesus does, because he was humiliated so he would be exalted. That's not an empty, vague platitude to get you to follow Jesus. It means facing the reality of your life, even in your struggles, to walk with him, and in the counsel of Satan that you hear, you're not just pinning your hopes on a new person next few years, to have a king that's everlasting, who is the fulfillment of that promise to David, a kingdom that will never end. Jesus is not getting exiled. Jesus is not getting evicted from his throne. And so, even if we do not understand what he is doing, know that his promises ultimately end in exaltation. Let us go to him and reflect in prayer now.